Welcome to the new Now Next podcast, produced by the AAJA chapter of the Asian American Journalists Association.
We are a community of journalists, academics, entrepreneurs, and students across the world who are committed to advancing diversity in the news industry and promoting the highest standards of journalism.
Each year, AAJA holds its annual New Now Next Media Conference, N3Con, to bring together members from across Asia. My name is Yehun.
And I'm Cheryl, and this is an episode in the podcast series leading up to our 2022 conference. Featuring the theme Covering a Disrupted World, we explore what it means to be journalists in times of conflict, crisis, and reform.
Tai Ho and Balji, thank you so much for joining us for our podcast today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
What brings you two here today together is your friendship. How did you two become such good friends? What clicked between you two?
Well, Balji was the CEO of MediaCorp Press, and I was the CEO of MediaCorp News. We were not close, actually. He was just one of the other CEOs, but I always noticed that he's very quiet. He doesn't really participate in the discussions. It was only after I left MediaCorp, I started writing my first book, and Balji wrote a blurb for me. And that was kind of the beginning of our friendship.
For me, it was, yes, as he said, we kind of met in 2000. That's when I joined to start today. But we were in very different offices. I was in Clifford Center. He was in some boondock. It's called
Caldecott Center.
Caldecott Hill.
Broadcast Center. Yeah.
Broadcast Center, which is known to have a lot of ghosts. Right?
It's a very old building.
It's a very old building. It has been sold now. So we met, and the only time I really met him was during our management meeting, where all the CEOs of the different departments of MediaCorp came together. I was very bored with those meetings. And every time I looked at Tai Ho, I could also see a similar boredom in him. So like that, we developed a certain friendship. But what I liked about Tai Ho was I never realized until he wrote his first book, which is
Riot Green.
Riot Green. What a powerful writer he is.
Oh, thank you.
It's something that you don't because you're a TV man, right?
Mm.
And then when we can talk about this later, but when he wanted to write the book, his language in the book, his observation powers, all impressed me.
I was actually impressed too. I thought the book was very powerful. One of the things that touched me was Balji's relationship with your grandsons. I grew up with my grandfather and my grandmother when I was younger, and it still has a huge place in my heart. So that's the part that personally touched me. I want to keep asking questions about your book. So this is a book called Transition that is coming out soon. It's actually launching tomorrow, our time. So by the time you listen to the podcast, it will already have been launched. This book is coming out. I had an opportunity to read it beforehand, which is a privilege. So I want to ask you, so there's already a book about Balji, The Reluctant Editor. It's the bestseller that Balji wrote about himself and his professional career. And you decided to write another book about Balji. This time, in the beginning of your book, you mentioned that you might be able to offer a fresh perspective about Balji's story. What do you think was left to be told about Balji?
Reluctant Editor is a book about his career. Transition is a book about his philosophy, his personal philosophy, the man and the family, the man and his friends, and also about his ideas of Singapore and what it means to retire, and what it means for someone to have a second act. So it's quite different from the book Reluctant Editor. The Reluctant Editor is quite focused on journalism in Singapore. This is really about Balji the man and his philosophy of life.
Yeah, just to add, because Reluctant Editor is more... See, the one of the funniest things about Singapore, the journalists take their stories to the grave. They don't write
about it.
Hardly anyone. My former editor-in-chief has written one, and I have written one, And both the books, especially my former editor-in-chief Chung Ip Sing's book, was a revelation. A revelation in the sense that it documented for the first time by an editor-in-chief of the Straits Times group the kind of control the government had on media. It has always been spoken about, but never put down in writing. So this was the first time that such a book had appeared. And mine was a kind of an extension of that book. Number of untold stories where government intervention and also that the kind of editors we had during my time were, I would say, quite brave in the sense that they were prepared to go against or argue with Lee Kuan Yew to say, hey, this is not the right thing to do. Sometimes they managed to convince Lee Kuan Yew. Sometimes they didn't manage to convince Lee Kuan Yew. So when they didn't manage to convince Lee Kuan Yew, they just followed what Lee Kuan Yew wanted. I don't think you would see that kind of editors anymore. So I call these editors the last of the Mohicans. And this book, Transition, is more about me as a son, as a husband, as a father, as a grandfather, And Tai Ho has put it together very nicely to show the transition of a man who saw all the three prime ministers, who knew the three prime ministers. So it's a transition of Singaporean. It's also a transition of Singapore. In fact, a friend asked me yesterday over breakfast. He said, I'm very surprised that you said all these things in your book. I said, why? Because as far as I know, you are a very private person. So I say it must be his skill to take out, Yeah. So, but I think also it's because, at a certain time in your life, you feel that you need to get out your story. Maybe it's that.
And do you think Tai Ho's third-person perspective was an advantage in getting your story out?
Oh, definitely. I don't think I could have done it myself, because you might be editing too much. And the kind of questions Tai Ho posts at our regular meetings every Monday, I don't think I would have done all that.
So the book is called Transition. One transition I was able to make out in Balji's life is your retirement. And when people say retirement, usually think of a dormant life, vacation-like life, golf, beach house, all that good stuff. Yeah, that wasn't necessarily the case for you. Your retirement almost seemed like a new start. What has your retirement enabled you to do?
Okay, first, when you use the word retirement in Singapore, you might get arrested because you are a burden on the state. That's how it's generally seen, right?
Well, yes.
Retirement is not the word. We never retire. We retire when we die. For me, I gave up my full-time job as a journalist at age 53. That is 20 years ago. The main reason why I wanted to give up my full-time job early is because an event that happened in the newsroom with my former editor-in-chief, Peter Lim, who at age 53, I think 53, early 50s, one of the board members went up to him and said, your deputy is ready to take over. Just like that. And of course, Peter is such a gentleman, or at least he didn't display his frustration and anger and all. He took it quite okay. But because there were people like me watching, and I told myself, this is not going to happen to me. I don't want the board or anybody to come and tell me, okay, your deputy is ready to take over. Then what do I do? If I don't plan for it now, that means I might be just out there doing nothing, right? So that was the factor that pushed me into thinking. And I also realized that you can't stay on in a job for long, which is also not a good thing to do, right? So you have to prepare for what Tai Ho describes in the book as a second act. And I was fortunate because in the sense that I just focused on what I know, what I am used to, what people know me about, which is editing, writing, communication. All this combined together, that was my second act. So I got connections, contacts, and we have combined together to do consultancies. In fact, one of the consultancies we did was the last presidential elections. One of those who was standing for, wanted to be the next president, and both of us were coaching him. And it turned out to be such a great double act, because he was more from the visual side, I was more from the journalism side or how to tackle, And it has been a very successful career, and not a full-time career, but still very successful.
I never really thought about retirement, even though I'll be retiring age soon, Watching Balji, I don't think the term applies to him at all, because he retired so early. When you're in your 50s, you're probably at the prime of your life. If you look at most of the US presidents or leaders elsewhere, they are at the peak of their life in their 70s. So when you're 50, you're actually very, very young. So I think that sort of forced him to reinvent himself. I'm quite inspired that one can reinvent ourselves at any age. While writing the book, and I went to research into what it means for someone to do a second act. For Balji, at least, it's for me inspiring.
I want to ask you about your professional career, Tai Ho, and some other things that you do. So you're best known to be the founder of Channel NewsAsia, and you also founded later a consultancy firm, media consultancy, but you're also a novelist and an art collector. So my question to you is, what meaning and fulfillment do you find in your professional career, and what meaning do you find in your artistic endeavors?
When I started out my career, I was offered the job in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I turned it down and I'm glad I did, because I think being in the media allows me to know a lot of things. It has been quite fulfilling. It's a very defining moment to say that I founded Channel NewsAsia, But I must say that I was the leader, I was a part of a group of people that founded Channel NewsAsia. And I think we were very privileged to go through that experience. I'm now a writer. I think Balji earlier on said that you're a visual person and then you're a writer. I think I'm a visual writer. Because when I look at something, I try to sort of record it in my mind. And when I write, my best writing is when I don't refer to any notes, and I just write from what I see, and I can describe what I see. I describe even the way a person pauses, the way a person seems to be thinking, and I think that has become a characteristic of my writing, which is actually very useful because of where I came from. I came from a visual medium, and I use that to write. So now I have a certain style that is quite unusual.
And there are enough examples in this book where he combines the visual medium with the written word. And when I read the book, I said, "Oh, did I do all that?" Yeah. So because that calls for a certain observation, right?
Yeah.
You need acute observation, and it is difficult when you are interviewing somebody. Your mind is focused on the questions and the answers, but his mind is also focused on how I react, what do I do, where do I put my hand, left hand, that kind of thing. Yeah.
There is a superpower.
Yeah, you can say that. Yeah, not many people have that.
Balji, this question is for you. So you talk about the value of independence quite a few times, both in your book and in your conversations with Tai Ho in Transition. You talk about it when you move out of your parents' house for the first time when you got married. You talk about it again when you're retiring, gaining that independence from the corporate life. You mentioned earlier that you don't want anybody telling you your deputy is taking over. And that is all about autonomy to make your own decisions. So why is independence as a value and as a lifestyle so important to you?
I'm not sure I will use the word independent, because maybe it's the way I'm made, maybe that's the way I grew up. Let's take when I decided after my daughter was born, when she was about 2 years old, that I would leave my family home. And the reason was because my brother, who was living with me, my mother and my father, was getting married. And I decided I should move because, you don't want to live like that, right? And my mother was so angry, not so angry, she was very upset. And I remember her telling me, "No, don't leave, we need to live together." And I remember also telling her, "You can have 10 kings in a house. You cannot have more than one queen." I still remember. And I practically walked out, not knowing where I was going to, which house. Finally, I did find one place. And my wife and I and my daughter took was just one suitcase. So we went into this house. But that was, if you ask me, was on hindsight, was the best decision I made. Because the place that I live in now, 27 Clover Way, is built by my wife. And she's so attached to the house. The memories, we have been there for 40 over years. So it is not a house, it is a home for me. And that's the difference, right? In Singapore, you will find everybody, it's a house. Buy today, sell tomorrow, move somewhere else. In my case, especially in my wife's case, we cannot move. One day I remember, maybe a few years ago, telling her that, why don't we sell this? We are getting old, Walking up and all that may become a problem. I still remember what she said. I said, do you know that every corner of this house has got a story to tell? You want to destroy that? I said, no, I'm not going to talk about this anymore. So it is not so much an independence issue as I would think it's a values issue. It's about values, In my profession, I won't say it's independence again. It is a value, And the value for me when I was progressing in my life as a journalist was to try and get as much of the story as possible. And when somebody tried to impose from upstairs censorship on you, I became even more, take even more harder line. Of course, not all the time, in a country like Singapore, when your boss comes and tells you, this story don't report for whatever reason. And the boss may have already agreed with the government. I also value my boss. I value the relationship, that if he has given a commitment, then I must go through with that commitment. Yeah, I come back to the point about value.
You mentioned 27 Clover Way, which is your home. You talked about Tai Ho being a visual writer. And if I had to pick one really good example of visual writing, it would be 27 Clover Way. For our listeners who may not know what that is, it is Balji's home address. And it's actually funny because Tai Ho exposes Balji's home address in his book. I actually looked it up on Google Maps, and it's actually the place that you describe in your book, and all of a sudden everything comes to life. The visual literary devices that I saw in your book is right there on Google Maps.
Actually, the editor of the book, Marshall Cavendish, they say, don't put down 27 Clover Way because it's not safe. Someone could go to Balji's house and stalk him. Then I said, but it represents everything. It has to be truth. It has to be truthful because the place is what represents his family, their relationship with one another. And I don't think it's unsafe. I think it's a good thing. So after a while, they said, okay, never mind. But at one point, I
didn't know this.
Yeah, Melvin was, you cannot put down 27 Clover.
Very traditional way of thinking.
Yeah,
right?
you cannot put down 27 Clover because what if something happens? They go stalk him and all that. I said, well,
I'm not a star.
No, we're not talking about Shah Rukh Khan,
Yeah. And the other thing about Clover Way is Tai Ho used to live in Clover Way.
Yeah.
So every
Mine was
Monday
91.
when he used to come to my place, take the MRT, your old address, you used to pass by your old.
Every time I pass by.
So he has there is an emotional connection.
Right.
To the road.
And that's why that's how you were able to describe it in such detail, because you passed it by every day.
Yeah. And also that my eldest daughter, who's now about 46 years old, I think, they have decided to come and live with us. Right? So you see the thing is moving in one full circle because they felt that we are getting old. So, if something happens to us, at least they are there to help us, right? So they have been staying with us for the last 4 or 5 months. Yeah, with my grandsons and 2 grandsons, Deepa, my daughter, and Sri, my son-in-law.
Must be a full house now.
Yes. So people who have asked me, somebody asked me the other day, have they adjusted to living with you? I said the question is, have I adjusted to living with them? Right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I call it a sweet and sour relationship.
Yeah, and that's family.
Yeah, because I'm for so many years I've been used to my house with only my wife and I, and we have enjoyed it. Last week or week before, I met a friend for dinner. He's about maybe 60s, and he said, I don't like to go out anymore. I love my house, a home. He has been also there for a long while. So I think as you grow older, certain things, you want a certain comfort zone. You don't want to move with it. That is why the older people don't like to move. So when you have, seriously, when you want to move when the government forces you to move out, right? Rebuilding program. If you understand the old folks, it's not just friendship with others, it's also your own home. There are certain things kept certain places, the familiarity becomes very important.
The book is launching tomorrow, and soon enough we're going to find out whether Tai Ho is right or your editor's right. I hope nobody knocks on Balji's door after
I'm
the book
quite sure
launches.
nobody will.
I might. Who knows?
Oh, you can come. You are not a stalker. Right?
So this question is for you, Tai Ho. You used 27 Clover Way, and as we talked about just now, it's more than a physical place. It's a symbolism for family, for love, for familiarity, and home. And you use this symbolism extensively in your book. Do you have your own 27 Clover Way?
Good question.
Yeah. As you grow older, you become more selective of the people that you want to spend time with, And I become very selective. My 27 Clover is an abstract concept of friends from all around the world. And we share the things we like. Because of social media, it helps us. So in like a week, we will probably be in touch quite a few times. So my 27 Clover Way is actually kind of a global group of people that I like to share the things I enjoy, the things we don't enjoy, and the things we are fearful about as we grow older. I'm glad that social media has allowed me to have my abstract form of 27 Clover.
Back to you, Balji, with another question. In your book, The Reluctant Editor, and in your conversations with Tai Ho, you mentioned being an introvert by nature. And you talk about how you were trying to break out of that introversive nature as a journalist. And this is a question from one introvert, me, to another.
You are an introvert?
Yes, I am an introvert. Do you think your introversive nature played into your advantage, in some ways at least?
I'm not sure, but I've always been an introverted person. If you talk to my friends, and even Tai Ho, when I was part of the MediaCorp team, I hardly spoke. In fact, one of my colleagues, a lady from SPH days, one day came up to me and said, at meetings, I see you stroking your beard all the time. What are you thinking? You're not saying anything. I said, that's a trick. I'm not going to tell you what I'm thinking. Why should I tell you? So the introverted nature, which meant that I had very few friends. My colleagues, I kept them at a certain distance. But when I became editor of the new paper, I decided that I should get out of it. Because when you're editor, right, you cannot be too much of an introvert. It was the toughest part, one of the toughest decisions in my life. So today I have become, Tai Ho will testify to this, I've become more an extrovert than an introvert. In fact, my wife tells me, nowadays you talk to people too much. There was an incident in one of the small train stations in India. So there was this porter, So I just went up and I spoke to him. For the next 10 minutes, he told me his entire life story. So my wife told me, what were you talking to him? I said, he told me his entire life story. This helps for me it helps because you get to know people, right? And if they trust you, they will tell you a lot of things. When I go to my coffee shop, waitress open up to me. We become so close friends. But it didn't start off that way, I suppose she trusted. I suppose the kind of questions I asked, all these kind of help, which has made my life richer, I think. But having said that, now that I'm an extrovert, there are moments when I want to be an introvert.
I think you are not an extrovert. I think you
Okay.
I think I see you as a journalist. In other words, when you see someone, you go up to the person, and after a while, you're asking questions like a journalist, and then the person will open up, and he has a way of doing it such that the person basically opens herself completely or himself completely. But I won't call you an extrovert. In many ways, you're still an introvert. He will still not speak most of the time, and so for people who don't know him, he's quite scary because because when he speaks, he speaks. He's armed with current affairs because he's a news person. It can be quite intimidating for a regular person to they will feel, oh my god, this is all very updated news that I need to be, I need to keep abreast with Balji, or else I can't talk to him. I think he's just a journalist.
Yeah, but I was a journalist when I started out in 1970. And that kind of a journalist and that behavior was very different from the behavior that I am today. I'm not shy, I'm not reserved. I may even use the word I was not reticent. Maybe the meaning of extrovert, when I don't go out there and shout and let your hair down, which I don't do. But extrovert in the sense of connecting with the people,
Yes, right.
which I never used to do before.
Mm-hmm. We'll settle this by calling you an extrovert by choice.
Yeah, that's true. Which
That's a
is
good
my
point.
choice. Yeah.
Another question for you, Balji. You talked about being involved in quote-unquote underdog newsrooms. You did work for bigger and more authoritative newsrooms like the Straits Times. For a bulk of your career, you were involved in smaller newsrooms. What role do these smaller newsrooms play in the Singapore media?
I think I was with the Straits Times for about 3, 4, 5 years. That was when the newspaper that I was heading, called The New Nation, had to be closed down. That was, to me, the worst part of my career, the Straits Times. Now, I'm not blaming the Straits Times, because the Straits Times has to be run like an aircraft carrier. The new paper and Today, New Nation, Malay Mail were all like small boats. And then that gave us the freedom to do a lot of things. And if I had not gone to some of these newspapers, I don't think I would be the journalist that I am today. Because you cannot just rely on government statements for your stories. You have to go and dig up the stories. We had to have journalists. We had to be all the time thinking about, what is the story for tomorrow? What is the angle for tomorrow? And it pushed us to the corner nearly every day. And I believe that when human beings are pushed to the corner, mostly the best comes out.
But you're also fighting for survival, right?
That's a question too, because we were the underdogs. And when you're the underdogs, you're fighting for survival.
Yes.
I mean, when I was editing the new paper, earlier stages, I had the chairman of SPH, who was a former minister, breathing down my neck and saying that I want to see the red ink disappear. So that also forced you, to think of things, ways, because you want to keep the paper going. If not, how many 100 over people will be without jobs?
Right.
I think working for the underdogs, in a way, is a Singapore story, right? When we were we left Malaysia, nobody gave us a chance. But look at what Singapore has become, because Singapore had to make it or die, or go back to Malaysia, which is not. I don't think Lee Kuan Yew wanted that, right? Mahathir wanted that, right?
I think fighting for survival makes it a real paper, because most Straits Times, they don't have to think about survival, because it will be here till God knows when, But many of the smaller papers have come and gone, So I think all the papers that you have worked for stayed on for a pretty long time.
Yeah. And that also is a type of journalists who came in, and they were quickly they knew that this is a way to do things, not your traditional way. Hunt for stories. Don't rely on big organizations just to give you the stories. Working for the underdogs made me the person that I am today, and I'm very happy.
This question is for both of you. Tai Ho, you mentioned in your book a challenge that the Singapore society faces today, and that is because the government has been stronger than most democratic governments, and as a result, some citizens are a little too dependent on the government to solve problems. What role, in your opinion, must the media play in this situation for Singapore to continue prospering?
For a long time, the media in Singapore is supported by the government. The media feels that it needs to support the government in return. So you have a situation where most people did not believe in the media. Even today, and the bad thing is that even when they are independent in their thought processes, people don't believe them. People think that the government must be behind it. For the future of the media in Singapore has to be such that there must be media that is independent of the government. So the Straits Times cannot do that role anymore. You have media like Mothership, you have Yahoo. I think more and more media agencies must strive to be independent. In other words, they cannot be pro-government or pro-opposition. They just must be independent. And I don't know if there are any agencies out there that are truly independent. So it's a very difficult situation in Singapore. But the future of media, especially because of social media, you must be credible with the people. That's the future.
And the way to be credible with the people is to become independent.
Yeah, to have an independent voice. Which is what I think Balji has strived to be. And I think most people now associate Balji to be an independent voice. In other words, he's not pro-government, he's not pro-opposition. In many ways, I think it's become cliched, he's pro-Singapore.
The Singapore situation is not that well documented or not that well known. Unfortunately, you cannot separate the media from the government. From 1974, when the Newspaper Presses Printing Act was introduced, which said that to publish a newspaper you need a government license, and that is renewable every year. If they don't renew it, they don't have to tell you why. Okay, so far we have not had that kind of a situation. So that's one, right? And the government is so obsessed with control of the media for whatever reason, and it has worked. In Singapore context, it has worked from a purely economic point of view. Right? Then the law is not enough. So then I introduce your CEO must be an ex-top civil servant, which is what we have had all the time for the last many years. You're not enough. Your chairman must be a senior government minister. So you see the control is in so many ways. Despite with all the control, the law, the appointment of senior government officers, the government from the Prime Minister downwards does a lot of things to convince the journalists. Over lunches, we all have attended, right? Why we have to do certain things this way. And they have very powerful arguments. So sometimes when you go in there and you come out, you feel, my God, I have been, what's the word? I've been...
brainwashed.
I've been brainwashed. Exactly. So if you want a slightly more independent press, then you need the government to relax its controls. And this is not a stupid government, It's a very smart government, right? Why is it that they don't see this? I don't know. Now look at what's happening to SPH, right? Straits Times. They are losing money and the government had to step in with taxpayers' money. Added to this factor, adding to all the problems, adding this as another problem to the major problems, the editors and the journalists have, I think, come to the conclusion, no point fighting this. Not like the last Mohicans. They would still fight. I mean, fight not in that shouting matches, would try and convince the government. And sometimes the government agreed, sometimes they didn't agree. But I think the present lot have surrendered. And the editors of today have also seen what has happened to some of these people who stood their ground.
He lost their
Pe-
jobs.
Peter Lim, as editor-in-chief, lost his job. Leslie Fong, as editor of the Straits Times, had to move out. Han Fu Kwang, many years later, also had to move out. So I'm a young journalist, I'm a young editor, and I see all these things. Do I want to lose my job? So it works in so many different ways. You see?
Just to add, I think this government feels and continues to feel that it has to control the media. They don't want the media to be New York Times. They don't want the media to be even the Asian version, because they feel that whatever it is, it's still good to have control over the media. And I think they will not change because this control has allowed them, so-called, to stay in power. They believe that even with social media, they still need to control the media.
Yeah, that's a mystery to me. Such a smart government, such a bright government, why does it still believe this? Because I feel, maybe not in my lifetime, you cannot control the media like the way you did.
But they feel that a critical media is bad for the government.
Yeah. But for how long can they do it?
They feel that, look at what New York Times is doing to the government. Look at what LA Times is doing to the US government. No, we cannot have that. If they don't praise us, they cannot criticize us. I think that is their stand today.
That's how I think social media has still got a long way to go.
Yeah.
But you can see it flourishing. If you watch the social media scene, you will see the stories appearing like the NUS graduate, who protested when he got his degree, right? Which came out in social media 2-3 days earlier. The Straits Times only came 3-4 days later. So the social media will have traction, but social media is not the best in the world. They also think they don't have the kind of manpower to do the kind of investigative work. But having said that, you would see small developments, Academia.sg is a site started by a guy called Cherian George, who used to be a former powerful journalist. And they are occasionally coming out with very well argued pieces, not written in an academic style. The most recent, one of the ones that I read, was they wrote about Lawrence Wong as the next Prime Minister. And I was quite surprised that they used the word, they described Lawrence Wong as a compromise candidate. There were people who didn't.
Most people see him as a compromise candidate because he's the one that no one disliked, but no one liked enough.
So when you have a compromised candidate, can you then have a strong leader? Singapore has survived because of its strong leadership, even do things which may not be that popular. I am quite confident that these kind of things will happen and you cannot control that. But it'll take a while. Maybe a long time.
Slowly, but for sure.
I think so. Today I was reading the Straits Times and I was so disappointed with the coverage of the ex-Sri Lankan president coming here. If you read that story, you will see, and this is happening in your turf. And the Straits Times report is quoting Reuters, is quoting BBC. What is this,
No, that means they don't have conviction of their own views.
Exactly. But if the government comes and says, it's not our view.
So they have no voice, actually.
And that leads to my last question for the both of you. And this is a question for our students who are listening. What advice would you give to young people who want to become journalists, especially in Singapore or in Southeast Asia?
I'm not in the habit of giving advice, but I would say that journalism is a profession that teaches you life skills. I'm talking from my own experience. When I first went in 1970, and I look at myself today, that I can articulate my views, I can suss out a person, because that's what we do all the time in journalism. Is this guy legitimate or not? Right? Is he trying to pull a fast one over me? So that kind of is ingrained in you. Writing, not just writing, communication. All these are so important to your life. So I use the phrase life skills. Journalism teaches you the skills that you need for life. When you go into journalism, after a few years you want to go and do something else, it's fine. So journalism is very important, but I would say get into the right publication. I thought you would ask me a follow-up question.
Yes. What is a right? What is a right media?
I would say that look at all the things that are available if I can say, it doesn't have to be in Singapore. It can be elsewhere, right? South China Morning Post, for example, although it is not as good as it was before. Reuters, right? Go and join them. Learn your skills. From a Singapore-centric news organization, I don't see any. We had newspapers like take the Business Times, right? At one time, Business Times was a great publication. Straits Times, under people like Peter Lim, Chang Ip Seng, Leslie Fong. I would say it was a great newspaper, but they were pushing the lines. They were not giving up.
There are also long-form journalism, If you are in the visual medium, I think Channel NewsAsia documentary department is a good place to be, because I think they do very, very good documentaries. And it is one place in Singapore that you can still hold your head up high to say, I do good work. One thing I want to add to what Balji says is a good journalist helps you to be a thinking person. And I think there are not many jobs in the world where you become a sharp thinking person. But a good journalist helps you to be one, Like what he says, subsequently, if you want to join other places, you can, because you have the skill to think critically.
I talk from my own experience, right? Journalism has made me the person I am today, and I'm still reacting like a journalist.
Yeah.
When I read a story, say, hey, there's something more to this story, right? Then what do? I go and text my friends, sometimes him, right? So this morning I text a young friend and asked him, do you agree with Singapore allowing the former Sri Lankan president in? You just go, and there are people who will come out with their views, right? So you're not isolated, and you have, as Tai Ho said, you have to have that thinking mind that is hungry for knowledge.
So journalism is a vocation, is a profession, but it's also a personal development project.
Oh, definitely.
That was the last question I had for you. Thank you so much, Balji and Tai
Thank
Ho,
you.
for being here
Thank
with
you.
us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was
Good
a great
questions,
pleasure. Thank
I
you
must
so
say.
much.